My name is Marcus Hale, and at 35, I've been on the road so much lately that the carpet in my own house might as well have been some distant hotel hallway. 2 weeks ago, I flew out to Seattle to finalize negotiations on what everyone at work was calling the biggest deal of the year. I spent 12-hour days in boardrooms, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating presentations that felt more like lifelines than profit margins. When the ink dried on that contract, I knew things would change. I booked an extra night at the conference hotel, intent on basking in the satisfaction of closing the deal. Then I remembered Claire and Jacob, my wife and my son, and how I'd missed too many ordinary mornings already. So I canceled the extra room, hauled my bag through empty airport corridors, and boarded the flight home a day early, tulips in hand. Yellow tulips, Claire's favorite, their petals like tiny cups brimming with sunshine. I pictured her standing in the kitchen, hair tousled around her shoulders, in some comfortable old sweatshirt, eyes bright when she saw me. I pictured Jacob, 6 years old now and boundless with energy, barreling into my legs with a squeal when he heard the front door. I pictured us sharing dinner, laughter, a moment of normal. And that vision propelled me forward faster than any business triumph could. Pulling into the cul-de-sac, I saw the street lamps flicker on, casting soft halos across familiar driveways. Ours was the blue-gray house on the left, with neat flower beds that Claire tended as if she were coaxing miracles from every seed. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked up the walkway, heartbeat like a starting pistol. The front door was ajar. I stepped in, calling her name with a grin I couldn't squash. The warmth inside felt good after 2 freezing mornings in hotel rooms, but something was off. The hallway light was dim, and I heard nothing. No dinner simmering. No television soundtrack. No footsteps padding down the hall. The silence was unnatural, like a held breath. I set the tulips on the console table by the door, their bright heads nodding. I unzipped my suitcase, left it by the stairs, and moved toward the living room. That's when I heard soft laughter. It wasn't the carefree laughter of a child inviting me into some elaborate game. It was low and intimate, like a private joke shared in a crowded cafe. I froze, pulse hammering in my ears. Yellow tulip petals wavered in the lamplight. I swallowed. Laughed again. Claire's laugh, I was sure, but layered with something new. Something I wasn't part of. I followed the sound quietly, each step a question. The family photos on the walls blurred past me. Claire in her cap and gown, me in my suit on our wedding day. Jacob in a superhero costume, grin wide. I reached the archway into the living room, and there they were. Chris Lennox, our neighbor from next door, sat on my couch. Too comfortable, too familiar, as though this were his own living room. He wore that faded army green t-shirt and jeans he seemed to live in, as if everything he owned doubled for comfort and anonymity. He lounged back against the cushions, one leg draped casually over the armrest. Claire sat beside him, wrapped in a pale pink robe that fell open at the neckline, her hair damp at the ends as though she'd just stepped from the shower. She leaned toward him, hand resting on his thigh. Her eyes, when our eyes met, went wide and uncertain, like a doe caught in headlights, heart pounding. Nothing moved inside me except the void where my heart used to be. I recognized that shock, the same shock I'd seen on Claire's face the first time I told her I'd been promoted, or the day Jacob first crawled into our bed after a feverish night. Only now it wasn't joy or relief I felt. It was the kind of coldness that settles over a man when the ground gives way beneath him. My lips parted, but no sound emerged. I watched her hand inch higher, and I felt each millimeter as if it were some cruel measurement of my failure. I knew that gesture wasn't about lawn mowing or soup deliveries. It was part of something else, something I'd never imagined in our house, our marriage, our life together. Chris looked up and saw me. His smile faltered. He pushed himself up, scraped his chair against the floor. "Marcus," he began, eyes darting toward Claire, then back to me. That pause echoed in the silence. Claire's face drained of color. She pushed back from him, robe shifting, and rose unsteadily to her feet. "Marcus," she said, voice catching. I heard the question behind that word. Why? How? When? But it sounded broken, swallowed by the sudden chasm between us. I took a step forward, almost too slowly for my own comfort, and laid the bouquet on the coffee table between us. The tulips, once symbols of hope, looked foreign there. Their golden petals spread like bright flags of defeat. I placed my carry-on bag beside them, unzipped halfway, revealing a neatly folded shirt and my business blazer. I picked up the small pack of Jacob's antibiotics. He'd been home from the hospital only days ago, remission official, and set it next to the tulips. My hand shook, but I held the objects gently. This was our life in two tokens, the promise of new beginnings in the flowers, the fragile thread of Jacob's health in the medicine. And between them sat a man who'd become something neither of us had planned. I didn't speak. Words would have meant bargaining, pleading, explanation. There were no words left. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room. I felt their eyes on me, saw Claire's lips part as though to call after me, but I kept moving, down the hallway, past the stairwell, and out the front door. The evening air hit me like regret made tangible, cool and sharp, slipping inside my collar. I closed the door behind me and heard the click, a final seal I couldn't unfasten. I walked to my car without looking back. I sat in the driver's seat, head leaning against the steering wheel, arrived before I even realized I'd left. I didn't call Claire. I didn't call Chris. I didn't call my parents. I sat there, tulips on the passenger seat, antibiotics in the console, and pressed my forehead to the wheel until my eyes blurred. And somewhere in that stillness I understood, the miracle I'd carried home was one I could no longer share. I drove away, the engines hummed like a requiem for everything I thought I knew. Tomorrow I would decide what came next. But tonight, I just let the world slip away in the glow of my dashboard, grieving the life that had ended the moment I walked through that door. The 10 years we built together stretched before me like a tapestry woven of joy and pain, each thread a memory I once thought indelible. Claire and I met in the spring of our sophomore year at the university, she in a sundress the color of fresh mint, hair pulled back to reveal a smile that caught the light like a beacon. I was the new transfer student, awkward and earnest, carrying too many books and not enough confidence. She laughed at my nervous stutter when I introduced myself, and I knew in that instant that my life had changed. From late-night study sessions in the library to hurried breakfasts between lectures, we became inseparable. By 24, we were married in a small chapel framed by dogwoods and bloom, her parents beaming and my family teary with pride. By 26, we held the keys to our first home, a 2-story brick house with a creaky porch swing and bedrooms that begged for the laughter of children. And by 27, it happened. Jacob, our son, arrived with a fierce cry and a shock of dark hair, and I vowed to protect him with everything I had. In those early years, every milestone felt triumphant. I remember the night we painted his nursery sunshine yellow, her humming a lullaby as she brushed a second coat onto the wall. I held the roller in my hand, but let her guide me, because she carried the vision for our future in her gentle insistence. We were a team, she with her warm hands and steady heart, me with my scrupulous plans and quiet determination. Together, we built more than walls and roofs. We built a world of Sunday pancake breakfasts, park picnics with his little legs kicking in the breeze, and bedtime stories read in voices too dramatic for an audience of one. Those years were the golden ribbon wrapped around everything I believed about love and family. Then, 8 years in, came the storm no one saw coming, Jacob's leukemia. It began with a bruise on his knee that wouldn't fade, a fatigue too heavy for a boy of 6. We passed it off as accident and growing pains, until his doctor's look of grave concern, until the hospital's antiseptic smell and the beep of the 4 machine. I can still recall Claire's scream the first time we saw the word cancer scrawled on the chart. It wasn't the triumphant life-changing moment I'd once imagined. It was a hatch opening in the floor beneath us, and we were plunging. Our partnership shifted overnight. Claire became the unrelenting vigil by Jacob's bedside, praying through the long nights when the chemo made him feverish and pale. She whispered stories to him, held his hand through pain that no child should endure, and wore my unspoken gratitude in her hollowed eyes. I became the provider of necessities, insurance claims, medication schedules, hospital rotations, every research article I could find on emerging treatments. I booked my flights to and from home like clockwork, always precise, always hidden behind the excuse of corporate demands. Between board meetings and conference calls, I sat in doctors' offices, learning acronyms and dosages, negotiating with insurance companies like a lawyer defending the life of my son. In those days, romance felt like a distant memory, something I half remembered from movies, not from my own story. We didn't have dinner dates or stolen kisses in the hallway. Our kisses were antiseptic, airborne, shared before I rushed back to the hospital or after she returned from an all-night vigil and found me asleep in the guest chair. Love became a matter of survival rather than passion, cleaning feeding tubes, tracking lab results, mapping out emergency contacts. The laughter that once filled our home dwindled to hollow echoes in the hallways of sterile wings. Despite the darkness, we held tight to each other. There were nights when Claire's tears fell onto my shoulder, and I pressed her face against my chest so she could find a moment of peace. There were days I found her in the garden, soil under her nails, hands cradling a handful of seedlings she promised would grow when Jacob got better. We talked about the future then, a return to Sunday pancake breakfasts, a day when his laugh would ring out in our backyard again. We spoke with the conviction of those who refused to break, even as every cell in our bodies feared collapse. And through it all, there were glimpses of who we used to be. I remember the afternoon when Jacob's counts rose enough that his hair began to grow back. Claire took him to the park, and I watched from a distance, leaning against our car door, when he slid down the slide and laughed so freely that my chest tightened with hope. I saw her smile then, the old spark igniting behind her eyes, and I remembered why I loved her, her unbreakable strength, her tender heart, the way she could coax joy out of a world as gray as any hospital corridor. But the cost of that crisis was high. We survived by focusing solely on Jacob's health. Date nights and conversations about us were casualties. We talked about deadlines and treatment plans, never about dreams that didn't involve cancer remission. The roles we'd embraced became our only identities. Claire the caregiver, me the provider. We became partners in crisis instead of lovers in love. When Jacob finally rang the bell signaling the end of chemo, the world felt unfamiliar. We stood on the hospital steps, hand in hand, breathing in freedom like a drug. Yet as we drove home, the car silent between us, I realized the crisis had reshaped us in ways we barely understood. That night, I brought home dinner, a candlelit meal I ordered from our favorite bistro, a bottle of wine tucked under my arm. I laid everything out on our dining table, hoping to recapture the intimacy we once had. Claire walked in quietly, eyes reflecting fatigue and relief. She sat down, took a sip of wine, and sighed. "We did it," she whispered. I reached across the table and took her hand. But the warmth I expected there was distant, a reminder that although our son was free from illness, our marriage was not. Now, 10 years in, I sit here recalling those days with a bittersweet ache. We built something magnificent, a life defined by commitment so fierce that it withstood the gravest test imaginable. Yet in doing so, we lost sight of the simplest joys that first brought us together. We became artisans of survival, crafting each day from fragments of hope and exhaustion, and in the process, let the thread of romance unravel. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of that decade, its triumphs and tragedies echoing through my bones. I still believed in us, believed that the foundation we laid could be reclaimed, that the laughter and love could be resurrected. But as I think of Claire and the life we once shared, I know that some parts of the tapestry have frayed beyond repair. Our 10 years remain a testament to devotion in crisis, but also a caution that devotion alone cannot kindle the sparks of love once they've dimmed. And as I stand on the threshold of our ruined home, tulips and medicine left as silent witnesses to our falling apart, I understand that what we built together may be beautiful, but it is also irreversibly broken. Chris Lennox moved in next door just as the first daffodils pushed their way through the thawing earth. I remember the morning distinctly. I was pouring coffee on the back porch, savoring the quiet that followed more than a week away, when I heard the rumble of a moving van. Peering over the railing, I watched a lanky man in a faded army green sweatshirt direct the driver, gesturing toward the rental house we'd come to know as the quiet one on the left. His hair was cropped close, and his posture suggested a soldier's disciplined bearing, straight shoulders, head held level as if scanning the horizon for threats. I offered a tentative wave. He nodded once and returned the balancing boxes. In those early weeks, Chris struck me as helpful in the simplest ways. He appeared in our driveway with a toolbox when our garage light flickered out, crouched beside the cable box when our television lost signal mid-game, and lugged empty trash cans back to their bins on the weeks our own routine faltered. He brought over chicken soup one evening after I'd fallen asleep on the floor beside Jacob's hospital bed, the fluorescent lights in his own house glimmering behind drawn curtains. I remember Claire's grateful smile when he set the steaming bowl on our kitchen counter and slipped away without fuss. In my exhaustion, I didn't think twice, just nodded my thanks and went back to tracking Jacob's vitals. Kindness in crisis felt like oxygen. Chris didn't ask for thanks or expect anything in return, but I sensed a growing ease between him and Claire. At first, it was her texting him to check if he'd had dinner. Next, it was him standing on our porch, toolbox in hand once more, while she leaned against the jamb in her paint-stained jeans. I was too wrapped up in spreadsheets and insurance forms to notice the way her shoulders relaxed when she saw him, or how she laughed more easily at his jokes than she had at mine for months. I thought gratitude drew people close. I hadn't imagined it might pull her from me. One evening, after Jacob's counts had stabilized and I managed to steal a few hours of home from the hospital, I arrived to find them sitting on the back steps. I joined them quietly, Chris with a cold soda in hand, Claire kicking at the grass with her flip-flops. The crickets hummed at the edge of the yard. I asked how he'd been settling in. He grinned, voice low and easy. He said he loved the neighborhood's quiet camaraderie. Claire glanced at me and said, "He's been such a blessing, Mark." I nodded, but my throat felt tight. "He's been great," I managed, closing my browser. Work could wait a few moments. In the months that followed, Chris became the lifeline I no longer needed but couldn't relinquish. When Jacob's hair finally grew back thicker than before, Chris volunteered to pick him up from school so Claire could take a break. He taught Jacob how to skip stones on the creek behind our home and cheered louder than anyone as the boy reached the opposite bank on his first toss. They brought back handfuls of polished stones and triumphant smiles. I watched from the porch, hands folded in my lap, and felt gratitude and envy war inside me. I was proud of my son, glad for Claire, yet a knot tightened in my chest as I realized that Chris had become the father figure I'd tried so hard to be and the partner Claire leaned on more than she did me. It wasn't just the practical help, it was the way he listened. Claire's story shifted from, "I have to, I want to tell you," and I noticed the difference in her tone. She confided in him about her dreams of starting a garden therapy group for families in the hospital's oncology ward, a project we'd once sketched on napkins but never found the time to pursue. She asked him for his opinions on paint colors for the nursery floor, on meal ideas to coax Jacob through his appetite slumps, on how to cope with the exhaustion that never quite let go. He listened with an intensity one hadn't shown in months of hurried conversations. When I asked her one night over dinner how she felt, she paused mid-bite, fork hovering above her plate. Her gaze drifted to the window, where Chris's house sat darkened against the night sky. "I'm tired, Mark," she said softly, "but I feel heard when I talk to him." That confession landed in my chest like a stone. I reached for her hand across the table, but she withdrew. "I know you're doing everything you can," she said, "but sometimes I just need someone who isn't carrying half the world already." I recognized now that her words were a plea masked as truth. She needed more than I could give. I was so consumed with maintaining the scaffolding of our lives, work, bills, doctor appointments, that I forgot the foundation was our marriage itself. Meanwhile, Chris stepped into the cracks I failed to notice, filling them with attentiveness and empathy. The morning I finally really saw them, I was tipping trash into the can when I looked up to catch Chris laughing as Claire leaned into him, a shining. The gesture was small, her head tilting to rest against his shoulder, but the weight behind it struck me like a freight train. I dropped the garbage bag and their laughter cut off, replaced by quick, startled looks. When their eyes found mine, they both froze, and I felt the distance between us stretch into a chasm. At that moment, I realized the comforting neighbor I welcomed into our lives had become something more. The man she turned to when I was absent, the man who reminded her how it felt to be seen. I understood then that our crisis had required unwavering support and that I'd met that need, but at the cost of losing the intimacy that sustained us. Chris had slowly become what I was too exhausted to be: present, attentive, and open-hearted. I stepped back, the trash can clattering behind me, and I felt the hollowness of the role I'd created for myself, husband in name but stranger in spirit. Chris straightened, hands empty now, and gave me a small, respectful nod before turning away with Claire. They walked up the driveway to his H. Instead, it shattered my certainty. As I stood there, the morning sun warming my shoulders, I vowed to fight for what we once had. But in that vow lay the ache of knowing I may already be too late. The slow fate of our marriage was not marked by grand betrayals or fiery confrontations, but by the quiet erosion of everything we once believed unbreakable. In the early days, Claire and I moved through our home like dancers in a well-rehearsed pas de deux. Our steps matched, our gazes met, our laughter rang in perfect harmony. Over time, though, our choreography faltered. We tripped over the same old miscommunications, our rhythms fell out of sync, and the music of our life together gradually muted until only an echo remained. It began with the little things. I'd come home from work expecting a warm greeting, but she'd be lost in her phone, scrolling endless news feeds for updates on pediatric oncology breakthroughs. I'd clear my throat with a hello, and she'd blink, smile faintly, then return to the screen. I kept thinking, she's just tired. She's been carrying so much. And I'd offer a tired hug before heading to my home office to tackle my own deadlines. We learned to accept those brief exchanges as sufficient, trading real conversation for polite acknowledgments. On weekends, I'd suggest a walk in the park, hoping to chase away the lingering hospital smells with fresh air, but Claire would check the weather, declare a thunderstorm was possible. Rain always spelled trouble, especially for Jacob's immune system, and suggest we stay in. We'd curl up on opposite ends of the couch, her head bent over a tablet, mine buried in my laptop. We sat side by side yet miles apart, our quiet so pervasive that I sometimes wondered if anything could truly connect us again. In the kitchen, the place where we once cooked elaborate meals together, her chopping vegetables, me stirring sauces while she teased me about my lack of culinary finesse, became a zone of solitary routines. I'd grab a protein bar and a glass of water before surrendering to the glow of my computer screen. She'd heat a frozen entree, eating over her own spreadsheets of medical bills and appointment schedules. We dined separately, sharing neither food nor stories. Our family dinners, once the heartbeat of our home, became a casualty of our mutual exhaustion. Conversations about us ceased. If I asked, "How are you feeling?" her reply was always, "We're fine." If she asked, "How was work?" I said, "It was productive." Neither question probed beneath the surface. We avoided the uncomfortable silence that would follow if we did. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to confront the widening gap. We stopped dreaming out loud. No more discussions about future vacations, no more, "When this is over, let's," type promises. Our someday statements vanished under the weight of our reality. Intimacy fell victim to our fatigue. There were no stolen kisses in the hallway, no hands brushing on the stair railing, no whispered declarations before the lights went out. We lay in bed on opposite sides, backs turned, sharing the same mattress but not the same heart. Sleep's arrival felt like a relief, a brief and necessary escape from the tension that hung between us. Sometimes I'd reach out for her hand in the dark, only to withdraw it when I realized she wouldn't take it. Even the heat of our bodies failed to spark any connection. I looked back and realized that our lack of fights wasn't proof of harmony, but of indifference. When something hurts you, you fight for it. Angrily, desperately, passionately. Yet Claire and I simply coexisted. We were roommates with a shared mortgage rather than partners. Our alliance, forged in the fires of crisis, hardened into brittle apathy once the immediate danger passed. We focused all our energy on Jacob's survival, and when that battle ended, we had nothing left to nourish our own relationship. Signs of her drift appeared in the way she carried herself, a subtle shift in posture when I entered the room, a hesitation in her smile, a softness in her voice reserved for our neighbor, Chris. Once, she lingered on the porch under the starlight, her silhouette outlined against the night as she chatted and laughed with him. I watched from our window and felt an ache I couldn't name. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was the sorrow of witnessing my home, my life, slipping from my grasp. I remember asking her one evening to watch a movie together, something lighthearted, like our old favorite comedies, and she shook her head. "I can't sit through that," she said. "It's too normal." I blinked. Her words cut deeper than any accusation. Normal was a luxury she felt unworthy of after everything we'd endured. I understood that pain, but I also understood that in refusing normal, we refused ourselves. The real breaking point came on a day that seemed ordinary. I came home early, tulips in hand, hopeful that a gesture of color in our gray world might spark something. Instead, I found her in the living room, head resting on her folded arms, tears shimmering on her eyelashes. She looked up at me, shame and sorrow mingled in her gaze. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. That confession cracked something inside me. It wasn't the betrayal I'd later discover, but the realization that she had lost herself, and that I had let it happen. I moved to her side, took her trembling hands in mine, and asked, "Who do you want to be?" But she shook her head, staring at the flowers I held. "I'm not sure I want to be in this marriage," she admitted, voice barely audible. The petals of the yellow tulips fell, one by one, onto the carpet as if nature itself grieved that moment. I felt the world shift beneath me, the tapestry of our life fraying in real time. Her words marked the end of our slow fade and the beginning of our unraveling. No dramatic confrontation, no shouting match, just a quiet confession that two hearts, once intertwined, had loosened beyond repair. I held her then, not knowing if I could ever let go, yet understanding that love alone might not be enough to undo the damage of time and trauma. In the silence that followed, I realized that fading away was not the drama of a single betrayal, but the tragedy of years neglected, small moments ignored, intimacy sacrificed for survival. And as I watched her retreat to our bedroom, leaving me standing in a living room strewn with tulip petals, I understood that sometimes the loudest heartbreak is the one you barely hear until it's too late. Looking back, the warning signs were there in almost every room of our house, etched into the small details I chose to ignore. Claire's lingering gaze on the porch swing as she watched Chris pack away his lawnmower. The way she lingered in the bathroom after a shower, tracing her fingertips along the cool tile, as if memorizing its contours. The extra minutes she took checking her reflection in the bedroom mirror before stepping into the hallway. I told myself these were side effects of stress, that any of us would cling to small rituals when life had ripped our family apart. But in hindsight, I recognized them as threads in a tapestry of betrayal I refused to see. It started innocently enough. She called him when she couldn't sleep, her voice hushed over the phone so the ring of the alarm clock wouldn't wake Jacob. He answered, and they exchanged little comforts. He assured her the night air would keep the frost off her car. She described a dream she'd had of Jacob chasing butterflies in the backyard. He listened. He cared. And I, blinded by my own exhaustion, mistook that care for neighborly kindness. I was the one digging through insurance claims and research papers at 2 in the morning. Why shouldn't she find solace in a voice that didn't carry the weight of responsibility? Then came the small misdirections, the work meetings she said would run late, when I could see from our driveway that Chris's truck was still parked under the streetlight. The errands she claimed needed immediate attention that led her miles away from home. Whenever I questioned her, she'd look at me with those tired eyes and say, "I'm just trying to hold us together," and I'd nod, guilt squeezing my chest. I convinced myself that any moment she spent away was a sacrifice for our family's well-being. I never paused to wonder if someone else was filling the emptiness I'd left behind. Her outward calm became a mask for something far more cunning. She smiled at me each morning as she poured coffee into my travel mug, but those smiles didn't reach her eyes. Once, I caught her fingering the edge of her wedding ring, that small circle of gold I'd chosen to signify forever. She traced its curve with her thumbnail, then slid it off, holding it in her palm as though weighing its significance. I saw the hesitation in that gesture but dismissed it as fatigue. I never asked why she removed it. Asking felt too confrontational, too likely to shatter the fragile piece I still clung to. The night I discovered the first real lie, I'd come home with Jacob's remission paperwork clutched in my hand, envisioning how her face would light up when she read the words. Instead, I found her on the back porch, bundled in a blanket, staring at her phone. She looked up, eyes gleaming with something I couldn't name. "They transferred him today," she murmured, "but not about Jacob." I followed her finger to a photo, Chris's son, a little boy about Jacob's age, grinning in a baseball uniform. My chest tightened. "You two visited his game?" I asked. "You said you were watching Jacob's labs be processed." Her mouth curved into an apologetic half-smile. "I switched spots," she said. "I thought Jacob was in good hands." Relief and anger collided inside me. She had lied to protect me, she claimed, sparing me stress. But lying, I realized then, was not protection, it was betrayal. I began noticing the discrepancies. The lines she rehearsed when I asked her about her day. The way she pressed her lips together when she thought no one was watching. The eagerness she displayed when Chris arrived with fresh coffee or a homemade pastry, little acts she once reserved for me. She confided in him in ways she no longer confided in me. Her anxieties, her fleeting hopes for normalcy, her dreams of reclaiming joy. I was left with the billings of our life, mortgage statements, medical invoices, while he held the conversations that used to sustain our marriage. Still, I clung to justifications. I told myself that beneath the lies lay love. That every misdirection was fueled by her fear for our fragile peace. I whispered to myself that I was overreacting, that whatever was happening was nothing more than a friendship deepening under pressure. But there came a moment when justification became unbearable. I found messages on her tablet quick, hushed texts to Chris after bedtime, words that spoke of longing, of gratitude, of need. They were short enough to be missed in a glance, but they added up to a declaration I could no longer ignore. "The way you understand me makes me feel alive again," one read. Another, "I'm so tired of feeling alone in this marriage." The betrayal throbbed like an open wound. I folded the tablet in my hand, each syllable a blow that echoed through the empty rooms of our home. I walked through the living room, memory flooding my senses, the tulips left untouched on the coffee table, the antibiotics for Jacob's care-gathering dust. Every object I'd placed with hope had become a monument to her deception. I confronted her that night, standing in the hallway while the ceiling fan rotated lazily above us. I held the tablet like evidence, and I searched her face for remorse. She didn't flinch. She looked at me, steady and resolved, and said, "I needed something you couldn't give me." I felt a shudder run through me as her words sank in. She named the truth I had refused to see. Our survival had come at the cost of our love. All the while, she spoke softly, as though explaining a delicate truce rather than admitting infidelity. "When Jacob got sick, we both changed," she began. "You threw yourself into work, and I took on everything at home. I thought I could handle it, but I was drowning." Chris pulled me to the surface. Her confession was calm, eerily so, as though she'd rehearsed it in countless heartbeats before. In that moment, I realized the lie of survival had been the most dangerous deception of all. We had survived the greatest crisis our family would ever face, but in doing so, we sold our souls to the illusion that simply staying alive was enough. We survived, yes, but we forgot to live. And in that void, someone else had quietly stepped in to fill the space where my love once resided. I walked away then, leaving her in the dim glow of the hallway light, the tablet still warm in my hand. Our survival had betrayed us both. The home we built to endure had become a prison of half-truths and longing. And as I moved through the shadowed rooms, I understood that in the battle to protect our son's life, we'd sacrificed the life of our marriage and perhaps our chance at any future together. The call came when I was halfway through the airport terminal, suitcase tugged behind me, a fatigue-induced haze blurring the faces around me. My phone buzzed, a text from Claire. "Call me. Now." My heart lurched as I dug it from my pocket, worries multiplying faster than my steps toward the congested departure gate. The flight attendant's voice over the intercom droned about carry-on restrictions, and I barely registered it. I tapped her name. Seconds later, her voice cracked through the line, barely above a whisper. "It's official. Jacob's in remission." 1,000 emotions slammed into me at once, relief so fierce it made my knees buckle, gratitude so profound it choked me, joy so bright it nearly blinded me. I found a vacant bench near gate 14 and sat down heavily, pressing my face into my hands. Around me, travelers bustled through security lanes, but I heard nothing save the rhythm of my heart pounding like a war drum. Remission. The word felt holy on my tongue. I pictured Claire's face when she first heard the news. Eyes wet, relief flooding her features so raw it would break her professional poise. I imagined Jacob grinning up at us, spring in his step returning as if his legs remembered life beyond the four poles. I thought of the future, simple mornings with pancakes and syrup wars, park outings without gloved hands and masked faces, bedtime stories free of medical machines humming in the dark. Everything felt possible. Without thinking, I canceled my seat assignment. I found the customer service desk and explained my plan. I needed to get home now. They squeezed me onto the next flight, and 20 minutes later, I was strapped into a window seat, heart thudding in my chest as the plane accelerated down the runway. The hum of the engines was a lullaby, ushering me back to the life I'd fought so hard to preserve. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander through every detail I'd missed. Claire's laugh, the way Jacob's hair caught the light, the peace of our home when we were whole again. I landed exhausted but exhilarated, suitcase dragging behind me as I stormed through the arrival hall. I grabbed a cab without even thinking of traffic routes, rattling off our address to the driver as if my voice carried urgency in its tremor. The city lights blurred past as I pressed my forehead against the glass, imagining the moment I'd step through our front door. I rehearsed my words, the surprise, the hug, the triumphant moment we'd share. When I pulled into our driveway, my breath caught. The house was dark except for a single light spilling from the living room window. My knuckles rapped the doorframe as I pushed it open. "Claire," I called, voice echoing in the empty hall. The yellow tulips I'd planned to replace lay wilted in a trash bin by the back door, evidence of the days I'd spent away. I dropped my bag and stepped inside, eyes sweeping over the silent rooms. I heard voices in the kitchen, low but unmistakable. My chest tightened. I followed the sound, each step heavy with anticipation. Rounding the corner, I stopped short. Claire sat at the table in her robe, as always, but this time her hands cradled a mug of tea, and across from her sat Chris Lennox, leaning close, his smile soft and private. Their conversation stopped when I appeared. Chris jumped up, spilling steam from the mug in a fleeting arc. Claire stood as well, robe gaping, vulnerability laid bare in the soft lamplight. My suitcase slipped from my fingers and clattered on the tile. The mug toppled, tea soaking into the wood grains of the table. I watched it all as though I were submerged behind glass. Chris tried to speak, Marcus, but his words dissolved in the tension. Claire met my gaze, tears filling her eyes, but she said nothing. I noticed the pill bottle on the table, Jacob's antibiotics, next to a crumpled tissue stained with tea. The open laptop played a paused show I'd once suggested we watch together. The remnants of my expectations lay scattered like the evidence of a life I believed we'd reclaim. I stepped forward, picking up the antibiotic bottle and a single tulip stem, once bright but now bent. In the hollow of my palm, they felt symbolic. Hope shattered, care misplaced, love betrayed. I placed both on the table between them, setting them gently, as though even in betrayal I could offer a final act of tenderness. My voice hovered in my throat, but no words came. Instead, I turned and walked out, the screen door clicking behind me like a verdict. Outside, the night air pressed in, crisp and unforgiving. I heard my own breath, ragged and unsteady. I drove away without looking back, fist gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. I remembered the first time I held Jacob in my arms, how I wept with relief and promise. I remembered Claire's wedding vow, the words spoken so sincerely, for better, for worse. This breach was a threshold neither of us had foreseen. I ended up in the parking lot of the same motel I'd stayed at earlier in the week, far enough to be anonymous, but close enough to hear the distant hum of our home streetlight. I left the car running, engine low. As I sat in silence, the world outside my windshield muted. I thought of Jacob's remission, the miracle I'd come home to share, and how its joy had turned to ash in my mouth. I pressed the pillow to my face and let the tears come, tears for my son's survival and for the life we'd lost in the bargain. I wept for Claire, too, not just for what she'd done, but for the exhaustion and pain that had driven her into someone else's arms. I wept for myself, for failing to see the cracks until they were too wide to bridge. When I finally lifted my head, tears streaked across my cheeks. I realized that the miracle of remission had come too late to save us. The call meant freedom from fear, but it arrived too late to mend what had broken between two people who once believed love could conquer all. I lay back in my motel bed, phone silent beside me, and thought of tomorrow. I would pick up Jacob next Friday, I'd promised, though he had no idea the storm waiting for him. I would make plans and face the aftermath. But tonight, I simply let the truth settle. The miracle I brought home had saved our son, but it had cost me my wife. And sometimes, survival demands a price no one bargained for. I stood on the porch steps for an eternity, listening to the echo of our home's emptiness behind me. The front door clicked shut, my silent verdict, and the world inside turned cold and still. I could almost hear the hum of the tea kettle on the stove, the drip of morning coffee filling our mugs, the distant whirl of. Instead, there was only the sound of nothing, no voice calling my name, no footsteps scurrying across carpet, no laughter ringing in empty rooms. In that hush I realized how much noise our life had made before it fell apart. I didn't know how long I lingered, but when I finally peeled myself away from the threshold, I carried nothing but the weight of absence. My suitcase remained by the door, forgotten and meaningless. I walked down the driveway, barefoot, feeling the rough concrete press into my soles like a reminder that I was grounded in this reality now. The yellow tulips and antibiotics, tokens of hope and healing, lay abandoned behind the glass. They might as well have been relics of a past too painful to reclaim. The night air was cool, stirring the branches overhead and carrying the faint scent of honeysuckle from the neighbor's garden. I inhaled deeply, tasting the crispness of solitude. For the first time since Jacob's diagnosis, I had no role. No meetings to schedule, no insurance claims to file, no hospital appointments to juggle. The only plan I had was to move forward without her, step by step, inch by inch. I drove without direction, letting the roads unfurl beneath me. The highway lights blurred, one after another, until I found myself on a back road bordered by fields, the sky overhead a canvas of stars unspoiled by city glow. I parked at a turnout and climbed out, the engine's warmth dissipating in the night. I leaned against the hood, eyes fixed on Orion's belt, those three bright stars that seemed so constant even when everything else was in flux. I thought of Jacob sleeping at his grandmother's house, unaware of the upheaval, dreaming of dinosaurs and superheroes. I hoped his dreams remained innocent and untainted by adult betrayals. My phone buzzed, her name flashing on the screen, but I ignored it. I didn't want apologies, explanations, or pleas. I wanted space to breathe, to grieve what we'd lost. The tremor in my chest had no words. It was a low, steady ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. I pressed my palm against the hood of the car, as if grounding myself to something solid, something that wouldn't crumble underfoot. When dawn began to creep across the horizon, I realized I'd slept in the car. My neck was stiff, my shirt twisted beneath me, but the sky was awash with pink and gold, a promise of renewal I wasn't sure I believed. I started the engine and headed home, though our home no longer felt like mine. I unlocked the door quietly, expecting the cavernous hush to swallow me again. Instead, a light flickered on in the hallway, soft and hesitant, followed by the distant patter of feet. I held my breath as Jacob appeared, yawning and rubbing his eyes, clutching a mismatched pair of socks in one hand and a stuffed dinosaur in the other. He blinked up at me, confusion and relief mingling in his gaze. "Daddy?" he whispered. I knelt, pulling him into my arms, and felt the fragile rhythm of his breath against my chest. His small body nestled against me, and for the first time since I left, I felt something solid beneath the fractures, my role as his father. He smelled like shampoo and pancakes, like safety and possibility, and I vowed in that moment to protect that innocence, even if it meant building a new life from the fragments of ours. He tugged at my shirt, eyes brightening. "Did you bring me breakfast?" he asked. I smiled, voice thick, and nodded. "Let's make pancakes," I said. As we walked toward the kitchen, his footsteps light behind me, I glanced at the living room. The tea kettle was gone, the tulips swept away, and the couch cushions fluffed into place as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. I knew the air between those walls had shifted forever. In the kitchen, I found the pancake mix in the pantry and set it on the counter. Jacob climbed onto a stool, bouncing with excitement. He dropped a spoonful of mix onto the floor and giggled, then looked at me with wide eyes, waiting for my reaction. I laughed, a raw, unguarded sound I hadn't allowed myself in months, and scooped up the spill. "Messes happen," I said, wiping flour from the floor. He grinned and climbed down, scampering to retrieve the spoon. As I mixed batter, I realized that our mornings could be messy and imperfect and still beautiful. I didn't need Claire to complete that picture. I just needed Jacob and the willingness to embrace what came next. The sun rose higher, light spilling through the window and warming the linoleum floor. The house no longer felt empty. It felt real. For the first time since that day, I felt rooted in the present. When the pancakes sizzled on the griddle and the smell of butter filled the air, Jacob clapped his hands. I served him a fluffy stack, and he devoured the top pancake in one bite, syrup dripping down his chin. I watched him, heart swelling, and realized that love endures in small moments. The laughter over spilled flour, the sticky sweetness of syrup, the trust in a child's embrace. Later, as Jacob played with his dinosaur at the kitchen table, I cleared the dishes and glanced at the living room doorway. I didn't know if I would ever step back into my marriage the way it was before. I didn't know if I wanted to, but I knew I had a choice, to be defined by betrayal and loss, or to redefine myself by resilience and love. I picked up the antibiotic bottle from the counter, still unopened, and packed it into my bag for our next doctor's visit. I would honor the promise I made to Jacob, that I would always be there for him. Then I walked into the living room, where the early morning light painted long shadows on the floorboards. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with possibility. The sound of nothing had transformed into the sound of a new beginning. The soft footsteps of a boy finding his breakfast, the crackle of a paper syrup packet, and the low hum of a man rebuilding his world, one imperfect, hopeful moment at a time. From husband to stranger, the transformation came with a single text. "He can stay with you this week. I'll pick him up next Friday." No flourish, no explanation, just the stark reality neither of us had dared voice. I pressed send and watched her name fade on the screen. In that moment, the last thread tying me to the life I once knew snapped. I didn't wait for her reply. I packed a small bag, enough changes of clothes for a week, my laptop, a few family photographs I couldn't bear to leave behind, and loaded it into the car. The sun was low, shadows stretching across the driveway like dark fingers. I glanced back at the house once more. The windows darkened, the door unmarked, the unspoken scene inside sealed for me forever. I closed the trunk and slid into the driver's seat with a sense of uncanny detachment, as though I were someone else borrowing my body for this journey. Driving away, I felt the weight of every mile, each one distancing me from the husband I used to be. The roads blurred past, strip malls giving way to quiet neighborhoods, tree-lined boulevards yielding to open fields, until I reached a small motel on the edge of town. The kind with a neon sign that flickers vacancy even when no vacancies remain. I reserved a room under my name, paid with a card Claire co-signed, and carried my bag through the lobby, past the bored clerk perched behind plexiglass. My reflection in the tinted window showed hollowed cheeks and eyes that had seen too much. Inside the room, I set down my bag and switched on the television, only to discover there was nothing worth watching. News anchors droned about politics, sports highlights, cooking shows. I couldn't focus. I turned everything off and sat on the edge of the bed, suitcase at my feet. My phone buzzed once, no new messages, then fell silent again. I realized I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the thought of room service felt absurd. I retrieved a granola bar from my bag, unwrapped it, and stared at it as though it were alien food. Finally, I took a bite. It tasted like cardboard and regret. Later, I ventured out in search of dinner. The neon sign for a nearby diner drew me in with its promise of greasy comfort. Inside, the booths were vinyl-wrapped and the jukebox played old country tunes. I slid into a corner seat and ordered a cheeseburger and fries, no pickles. The waitress brought coffee in a chipped mug, and I watched the steam curl upward. With each sip, I felt a little more grounded, though a dull ache remained in my chest. I thought of Jacob, sleeping under a familiar quilt, safe in his grandmother's home, unaware that his father had become a stranger. I thought of how his laughter used to fill our house, how he used to chase me through the halls with his small feet. I wondered whether he would recognize me when I picked him up next Friday, whether he'd ask why I looked different, why I smelled of motel curtains and diner coffee. And in that wondering, I felt the sharpest pang of all, the loss of my role as both husband and partner, replaced by the simpler, bleaker identity of dad who visits on weekends. Back in the motel room, I peeled off my shoes and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The overhead light cast a dull glare on the popcorn texture above me. I closed my eyes and tried to will my mind to quiet, but memories intruded. Claire's robe falling open, Chris's silent apology, the tulips wilting in the vase. I revisited every moment, hoping to find a clue I'd missed, a choice I could undo. But the past remained immutable, a sealed letter I'd never read in time. Sleep eluded me. Instead, I reached for the photographs I'd brought, one of Claire and me on our wedding day, the chapel behind us aglow with spring light, one of Jacob toddling in the garden, the sun painting him in gold, one of the three of us at the beach, arms around each other, laughter frozen in pixels. I studied those images, tracing the lines of our smiles with a fingertip. The man in the wedding photo looked like a stranger too optimistic and untroubled, blissfully unaware of the trials ahead. Finally, exhaustion claimed me, dragging me into a dreamless half-sleep where reality and nightmare braided together. I woke to the harsh glow of the alarm clock, 6:15 a.m. I sat up, back stiff, and ran a hand through my hair. The morning air was cool through the cracked window, carrying the distant hum of traffic. I dressed slowly, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt that felt unfamiliar. I gathered my things and stepped outside, letting the chill wake me fully. I wandered the motel grounds, noting the chip paint on the railing, the empty lawn chairs folded against the wall. I circled back to the parking lot and leaned against my car, arms crossed, staring at the horizon where the sky washed from ink to rose. In that quiet hour, I confronted the depth of my solitude. No colleague to share coffee with, no spouse to greet me, no child stirring in the next room, just me and the vastness of a life upended. Yet within that solitude, I sensed something new stirring, a seed of possibility. I had become a stranger not only to Claire, but to myself. The husband I'd been was gone, but in his place stood a man unbound by the expectations that had suffocated him. I could remake my life, define my future, and perhaps build something authentically mine. The thought brought a tremor of hope, fragile but real. I returned to my room and sat at the small desk, phone in hand. I opened my contacts and saw my mother's name. I hesitated, thumb hovering over call, then pressed it. Her voice, warm and steady, answered on the first ring. I managed a rough, "Hi, Mom," and she filled the silence with concern. I told her I was okay, that I missed them both, that I'd be home soon. I left out the details, the betrayal, the text, the motel stay. Instead, I spoke of new beginnings, of learning to breathe again. As I hung up, sunlight filtered through the curtain, banishing the motel's shadows. I packed away the photographs, closed the scrapbook of my old life, and slid the key under the door on my way out. I didn't know where I was going next, maybe back home, maybe somewhere entirely new, but I knew I would walk forward. No longer a husband in a marriage that had died, I would be a father reclaiming his place in his son's life and a man discovering who he could become when stripped of everything he thought he was. With that resolve, I locked the car and headed into the day, a stranger no longer burdened by a past he could not change, but carrying a future he had yet to define. I returned to the house 2 days later, heart pounding with a mixture of resolve and reluctance. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving the driveway bathed in the soft glow of the street lamp. In that lamplight, our home looked both familiar and alien. Windows dark, porch empty, the air still. I carried a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, its weight negligible compared to the torrent of memories flooding my mind. As I unlocked the door with the key she still refused to return, I felt like a ghost entering someone else's life. Stepping inside, I paused in the entryway and inhaled the scents I knew so well. The faint trace of cedar in the hallway rug, the lingering warmth of her vanilla body lotion that clung to the bedroom doorframe. Each fragrance tugged at me, a reminder of days when our home was alive with laughter and the patter of little feet. Now the silence pressed in, heavy and expectant. I set my bag down and moved slowly, as if gliding through a museum of shared history. In the living room, the tulips were gone. No sign of the bright yellow blooms I had once laid on the coffee table in hopeful celebration. The cushions on the couch were neatly aligned, the throw blanket folded with precision. I ran my hand across the armrest, feeling the imprint of where she slept when insomnia kept her up. I pictured her curled in that spot, tears slipping down her cheeks in the dark, and I realized I'd never fully understood the depth of her loneliness until it was too late. I climbed the stairs 2 at a time, as though speed could diminish the ache in my chest. In our bedroom, I opened the closet door and found piles of clothes on one side, hers folded and waiting. I selected a few shirts and his pajamas for Jacob's next stay, placing them carefully in my duffel. My fingers brushed against her favorite dress, the hem of which used to sway as she danced through our kitchen. I closed my eyes, inhaled, then let it fall back into the pile. I couldn't take that. It belonged to the life she had chosen. I moved to the chest of drawers and opened the top drawer. Inside, I found our wedding photo in a simple black frame. Her laugh caught mid-glow, my smile awkward and proud. It felt heavy in my hand, more so than any object I'd lifted in months. I placed it face up on the nightstand, exactly where it would greet her each morning. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it as a benediction, an affirmation that what we had once built was real, even if it no longer had a place in my world. I paused in the doorway, surveying the room one last time. Our bed lay unmade, sheets rumpled in a way that suggested nostalgia rather than use. I thought of the nights we shared secrets in that bed, promises whispered under low light. Now, it was an empty vessel, a reminder that intimacy can vanish when both parties forget to nurture it. On my way out, I heard the cabinet door in the bathroom creak open. I peered in to find her toothbrush gone, replaced by a single ragged sponge. I felt a pang of guilt. I had stripped the house of my belongings, but she had emptied every trace of me she could reach. Still, I left one thing behind, a note folded in half and tucked under the coffee mug on the counter. It simply read, "I'm sorry you felt alone." I walked back downstairs, and the front door clicked behind me with finality. In the driveway, the night air wrapped around me like a gentle benediction, forgiving and patient. I kissed my own palm and touched it to the wedding photo on the nightstand, an act no one witnessed, but one I felt down to my bones. As I drove away, headlights cutting through the darkness, I felt the shape of loss settle around me. Yet beneath it lay something unexpected, relief. The act of clearing my life from that house felt like a ritual cleansing. I was no longer bound to a ghostly version of our marriage, and she was left with both the memory and the emptiness it created. When I reached my apartment, I set the duffel by the door and lay on the couch, exhaustion seeping into my bones. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to breathe deep, unhurried breaths that carried me beyond regret and into acceptance. I thought of Jacob, tucked in safely at his grandmother's, and I whispered his name. In that quiet moment, I understood that although our past would forever echo in empty rooms and framed photographs, the future remained unwritten. And for the first time since I walked out, I felt the tentative stirrings of hope. What remains after the ending is not the wreckage of our house, but the fragile architecture of two lives forever changed. I've been here 7 months now, an apartment across town with bare walls and secondhand furniture, and I've learned that simplicity can feel like sanctuary after chaos. Weekends with Jacob anchor me. We build Lego cities on the coffee table, his laughter a medicine more powerful than any I've known. I rise early to make pancakes, flipping them high so he can catch them midair, syrup dripping down his chin as he beams. In those moments, I reclaim the role I never wanted to lose, his father, unwavering in devotion. Monday through Friday, I return to a quiet apartment filled with the hum of my own thoughts. I've lined the walls with photos of Jacob's milestones, first steps, lost teeth, birthday candles blown out in triumphant clouds of laughter. There's a framed quote above my desk: "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is start over." I repeat it each morning as I brew coffee, teaching myself to embrace the vulnerability of new beginnings. I think of Claire often, not with anger but with a bittersweet clarity. I remember her smile on our wedding day, the promise in her eyes when Jacob was born, and the exhaustion etched into her features during his illness. I loved her fiercely, and I mourn the partnership we lost, even as I acknowledge its unraveling was inevitable. She never apologized, not in words, but I sense her guilt in the way she avoids my number and in the fact that she left every trace of me behind when I cleared out my belongings. Perhaps in her own way, she's carrying the weight of her choice alone. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I drive past our old neighborhood. I slow by our house, now refurbished, tulip beds replanted, windows glowing with someone else's life. A pang of nostalgia hits me, but it passes. I no longer belong there. My home is here, in these simple routines. Grocery runs with Jacob in the cart, bedtime stories under the soft glow of a reading lamp, Sunday morning cartoons and cereal spills on the rug. Love persists in these small rituals, in the comfort of being seen and needed. What remains after the ending is not bitterness but possibility. I've lost a wife but gained clarity about what I value: honesty, presence, and the unshakable bond between father and son. The future stretches ahead like an unpainted canvas, and I hold the brush, ready to fill it with moments of genuine connection, resilience, and a love that, though altered, endures.